Welcome, friends, to the Total Innovation Show, where the seeds of innovation grow. We dive into minds both sharp and bright, exploring ideas that spark the light. In a world where change is moving fast, those who adapt will always last. From AI tools to creative trends, we'll break it down with a total innovation lens. So sit back, listen, and soon you'll find we're here to uncover the visionary mind. And speaking of visionaries, today we've got a great guest, a leader in innovation among the very best. He's built, he's led, he's paved the way. Let's dive into his story without delay. Our guest spends his days thinking about how AI will change how we create, using generative tools like ChatGPT, Midjourney, and the ever-growing Slate. He used to work at PayPal, focused on innovation, where he evangelized creativity to the employees of every nation. At PayPal, he also had many roles in the field of products, from management to marketing to launch, which was a bit chaotic. Previously, he founded a company, Sketch Maven, where long startup nights turned his appearance to unshaven. Prior to his career in tech, he was in finance and accounting, you see, starting his career at the company with a meatball logo, GE. He has an MBA from Berkeley and a BS from Illinois, and occasionally teaches leadership to mature girls and boys. He's been granted over 100 US utility patents, and if you don't like his rhymes, you're on his list of enemy combatants. Overall, he tries to be a very helpful guy, and while he uses the tools, neither he nor I wrote this with AI. So without further ado, let's bring him on stage, a true innovator on the pulse of the age. He's reshaped how we think with creativity and play, with bold ideas that lead the way. So lean in, listen close, and we're ready to go. Mike Todasco, welcome to the Total Innovation Show.
Simon, I am here and I'm very excited to be. Okay, the rhymes are just not going to work for me. I don't. That was so impressive. I think your audience will be so disappointed if we don't continue this entire episode in some sort of rhyming scheme now.
It's
You've
been one of
set the
those
bar
days.
very
It's been
high.
one of those days, Mike. To be honest with you, I did an exec meeting earlier with a bit of rap as well. So it's just been one of those Mondays. But I actually, as you know, I borrowed most of that from your highly creative LinkedIn bio, which I thought was great. And I don't normally do a rhyming introduction, but hey, you
I
introduced
loved it
yourself
though.
in rhyme, so maybe there's a story behind that. Maybe we can start there.
There was. So when I was at PayPal, I was doing a lot of different talks. And in doing those talks, people would introduce me all the time, and it was just a standard corporate bio that I had. And honestly, Simon, I was just getting bored hearing people just say my own bio for me. So at some point, I'm like, I'm just gonna write this up, and I'm just gonna send this to people. And most people like don't know what to do with it. Unlike you, they just kind of freak out, they freeze, they whatever. They're like, but I did have one person. I remember this on stage. She got up there. She's like, "Oh, cool. This is your bio." And Simon, she rapped it,
All
and
right.
like it's like you sounded good. You got that soothing British accent. Like it sounded really nice, I will say. But when she did it, it was next level, and I'm like, this is just the greatest thing ever. And honestly, the rest of the talk I gave was nowhere near as good as her rapping my bio. But that's what it came from.
Well, maybe I'll do a recut and see if I can wrap it for you as well. Well, I think we'll
Love
leave it there.
that.
But listen, seriously, welcome, right?
Thanks.
We had a bit of a pre-chat, and you've done a lot across a portfolio of different experiences. And in unpacking this and thinking about what might be most useful from an audience perspective to learn from the mind and the experience of Mike, I feel like your life has, maybe they're not distinct chapters from your perspective, but the idea of Mike the inventor, Mike the founder, Mike the in-house innovator, and now Mike the educator, maybe the AI educator. So I think maybe we'll unpick the episode a little bit like that, but I'm sure it won't
Sure.
quite work that neatly as we go. So let's start there. Mike the inventor, 100 US utility patents. Tell us a little bit about Mike the inventor and the story behind that.
Look, if you would have asked me, 15 years ago, would I ever have any patents? I would be like, what are you talking about? I'm not an engineer. Like, that doesn't even make any sense or anything like that. It wouldn't. When I was at PayPal, my first look, a technology company started there in 2011, was working on mobile products before it was like it's its own little weird team in the company. Like mobile was weird back in 2011 still. So, I was at very much in an innovative place. I've always been up on new technology, but again, my background's in finance and accounting. And in 2013, I happened to be working on a very revolutionary product, which I did not invent, but kind of contributed to in many different ways. And it was called PayPal Beacon. And people could look up it on YouTube or anything like that, and you could see it. It never made it to mass market, but effectively what it was a little piece of hardware that your phone would be able to passively talk to it. So you could walk into a store and it would be able to like check you in automatically. So you could pay hands free when you walk into the store. It would just recognize you and your phone as part of it. And one day I was the product launch manager, was my function on that product. And I had a meeting with some lawyers from inside the company. And I did this all the time. I kind of got the dirty work of that from that perspective. I'm like, okay, no big deal. Meet with lawyers, I could do that. And the lawyer I was sitting down with, he was like, okay, tell me about the product. Okay, I did that. He's like, well, what else can it do? What else can it do? Well, that's cool. What else? Could you do this? Could you do this? And like, 30, 45 minutes into it, I'm like, oh my God, this is like a brainstorm session. I'm like, what is this? And he's like, oh yeah, the patent. And he explained it to me. And it's, like the whole patent process of building on ideas. I'm like, so you kind of come up with an idea, and almost by definition, it's an idea that no one ever thought of before. It's useful and it has all these other criteria. And that was like leading into the whole process. And I got like really intrigued by this because I love just kind of thinking about the future. And while I'm not an engineer by trade, I kind of understood technology well and how it works and how it doesn't work and all this, and can ask a lot of dumb questions without being embarrassed. And so I took this concept from this one meeting, and I would bring other people into brainstorming meetings about products that they were working on and doing this. And I would hold my own. And we had a idea submission process. So I submitted ideas. Like over my time at PayPal, I probably submitted thousands of ideas. Some of them became real products, some of them became patents, some of them, and most of them were junk. But that's kind of the ideation process that you go through. And yeah, I did this for years, in jobs before I was in innovation. And of course, once I was in innovation, like that was a big part of my job, but like that was a huge part of what I did. And it was so gratifying, so much fun. It's just fun to sometimes, like when you're building a product, just to think like, okay, what is possible? Just to step back and think about like what could be from this. And it's interesting, years and years later to see like these products, these ideas and concepts, like even becoming reality and PayPal products and other companies' products and so forth today.
Congratulations. And, I think it's always nice to see those ideas through those much vaunted ideas schemes that, actually produce something. I guess credit to all sides of that machine worked to a degree.
Yeah.
Right. When you were participating in that, you're not an engineer, you've got all these different patents to your name. What was the motivator for you? I'm a slight patent skeptic. I believe it. They've got
Oh, we
value,
can
but I'm a
talk about
patent
that for
skeptic.
sure too.
And so
Yeah.
maybe we can dig
Actually,
into that. Yeah.
actually, let's start there and then let's get into the motivation. Because look, so when I was running innovation, I actually started on the intellectual property team. Like they were the ones who kind of create when PayPal became a separate company from eBay. Innovation was owned by IP, and that's like because they were willing to fund it because they wanted to rebuild the portfolio. Because at that time, especially, so patents, as I would always explain it, they hated when I explained it this way, by the way. But as I explained it, it was kind of like nuclear weapons. Like if you have these things, you're building up your stockpile just so in some ways another country isn't firing them at you.
Right.
At any given time, probably shouldn't be saying. I'll make it more generic. In any given time, tech company A is probably violating a bunch of patents of tech company B, and as long as they are both violating each other's patents, it doesn't really do them any good to go after each other,
Right.
generally speaking. Now, sometimes that breaks, and like you have Apple versus Samsung, which was a huge patent case, and many others like that. Would the world probably be in a better place without software patents? I actually think so. I mean, but that's not the world that we live in. So for us within the company, and being much smaller than a lot of the other technology companies out there, it was imperative kind of for our survival so we don't get sued out of existence to think of other things that our competitors could be doing. And again, I see these in competitors' products now, and I know there's been no lawsuits about those, but I see these things all the time. And that's kind of the detente, for lack of a better word, that you have in the patent world. Now, what really inspired look, this is one thing. I'll talk actually about what inspired others versus what inspired me. Because most of my job at PayPal wasn't coming up with ideas
Okay.
myself. It was getting other people to do that. Because I'm just one person. You got 20,000 other smart people. It's much more powerful to get them thinking about ideas. Um, and honestly, Simon, it was the simple stuff. When I took on the job on the innovation team, it was about increasing the amount of patents that PayPal was filing.
Okay.
How was I going to do that? The first thing I asked my boss for was like, boss, you're going to have to give me a bunch more money because I'm going to have to financially compensate people to do this. She's like, we don't got more money. Just go with what you got. I'm like, okay, like that's not possible. And it was the best advice I ever got. The things that worked for people were having a leaderboard on every campus around the globe. And I kind of talked to communications about this. And once a month, I would actually put out like the number of ideas submitted by person, by location, all these different cuts of like who's submitting the most ideas. Because I really focused on the top of the funnel. It takes a while for you to figure out what a patentable idea is. And it was all about just kind of the top of the funnel, the actual ideas. And so we would put these out there, and people were really inspired by that. They wanted to see their name on that leaderboard and all that kind of stuff. Once you actually got patents, you got a jacket with little swag on it and all this stuff. And sometimes a hat or something like that would cost like $20 or something. It was not a lot of money that it cost, but those things mattered. They were
Yeah.
credibility. They were whatever it was to people, and that was a huge lesson for me in incentives and what really motivates people. And again, you always think it's money, but like honestly, for somebody who's already well off, getting a couple $1,000 or pounds or whatever, like it doesn't really mean anything. Their life is not going to be any different, but like their life or at least their credibility within like the microcosm of their job when they get a fancy jacket or a little trophy or whatever, that actually matters a lot more and it's a fraction of the cost.
Agreed. I definitely think those, and I think recognition symbols, as even as
Yes.
some very obscure ones have come up over my time. A carved statue of themselves was one that someone once requested in one of the companies that we work with. Uh, another one that I remember, someone offered a meal with the CEO at the top of a mountain, which was no. So, but forget that the meal with the CEO, great. The meal with the CEO at the top of a mountain, I was like, that's an interesting tilt.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
So we actually did something sort of similar to that when we were at PayPal. This was in 2017, 2018. We were experimenting with some blockchain technology at that time, and we made our own internal, for lack of a better term, tokens, like innovation token, let's call it. And we would actually give out these tokens as you come up with ideas or attend an event or whatever, but then you could cash these in. And then you could cash these in for experiences. The CEO at the time did Krav Maga, like the Israeli fighting and all that. You could
Yeah.
do a session with him, or you could go running with our CFO. And I got all these leaders to do things that were very personal to them, put them on there. And it was really exciting to see people do that. Like our CTO, he actually did this. I remember the CTO at the time, Sri Shivananda, who's now at JP Morgan, a
Yeah.
great business mind. And he did, he would go to people's houses and actually and be like IT support for them at their house. So set up their Wi-Fi, make sure everything's working properly. This is the CTO of a company with he's got 5,000 people working for him, and he's taking on tech support at one of his employees' houses. And like those were the kind of things that we got out of there. Like I would wash somebody's car or whatever. Like it would be all that type of stuff. It was fun, and that people really it really got people excited about innovation and all this other stuff as well.
How do you feel about those 100 patents today? Is it a badge of honor for you? Is it like what is it out after the
Um,
fact? I guess to a degree.
to be completely honest, I don't think of it much. It seems
Yeah.
like a different era, a different time. The only
Different.
reminder I do have that we would give puzzle pieces. So, and these puzzle pieces fit together. So I will say, I have a lot of these puzzle pieces, and my kids occasionally will just make a cool structure out of these big glass trophy puzzle pieces from that. But, um, yeah, it's hard to say. It's like a different life, almost a different person back then from where I am now.
Let's stay at PayPal, right? Let's talk a little bit about that transition from the ideas, the inventor of patents and the person throwing a million and one different ideas into a ideas process to the person that's starting to be an in-house innovator and, as you said earlier, enable the great minds that are working across the business. Can you talk a little bit about that transition for you, but also like some of the key lessons that you learned in doing that? And I guess from the way you describe it, building it out as a center of enablement for innovation for PayPal.
Yeah. And the question is really like for others who are listening to this, it's kind of how do you build that culture? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I think it's a bit of a, like, yes, what was the journey there? Because like, on the one side of it, you're chucking ideas in and doing something, and
yeah.
was that an accidental? And then, oh, this sounds interesting, or a defined career path that no one I think would choose for themselves generally.
I mean, look, what I would say is the job didn't exist before, and I remember I would work with so this was back when I was like a product manager. I was doing all of these brands. I was basically doing the job I eventually took on at PayPal for free for probably 2 years.
Right.
I was hosting all these brainstorm sessions just with other people, getting their ideas and just sending them into the IP team. Like, this was not part of my job or anything like that. My actual bosses were kind of like, "Why are you doing this?" Like, but I'm like, "Oh, it's fun." I mean, and I've really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed involving people in the process. So, fast forward, and I remember planting seeds of like, well, what if this was a full-time job? Like that kind of thing didn't exist. But I remember planting some seeds with the legal team, like, hey, if you ever needed something, I know we're splitting. I know you want to rebuild this patent portfolio. Like, how about we build it from the ground up? So, like, there was a lot of like seed planting in that. Um, and so I did that for some time, and then just the opportunity arose, and there was a lot of resistance for me being a non-engineer and non-lawyer to be joining the legal team to be doing this. But it eventually worked. I mean, I convinced the right people, and they took a chance on me, and things worked out with that. The thing that excited me when I was in the job, though, was like just without really any authority or like direct authority within the company, to just kind of take on this role as a cheerleader of innovation for the entire company. And just how did we would we do that? How would we engage people and do this all with almost no money? And it was fun because it was a constant experiment. It was just trying stuff out. It was failing miserably. Like, I would host events all the time in our innovation lab. And our innovation lab was literally, I was able to get facilities to take a conference room offline, and I just painted the walls differently, and I stole a bunch of furniture from other parts of the that wasn't being used from like all around the campus to just make it look different. And then therefore that just became the innovation lab. But I would just try things. Like I tried bringing in authors to talk about stuff, and that proved to be really popular. And so, my time, I brought in over 100 authors to PayPal and gave out books, which was a very cheap way in hindsight to bring in speakers to an event. Because some of these people would probably charge $25,000 for speaking at a company, but they would also just come if you pre-order 100 copies of their new book while they're on tour. And so,
Correct.
like, that's a much more cost-effective way to bring them in, and you get to bring in, hand out the books to everybody in the audience, and then have discussions about the books and all that. So it was just one thing, and it was just experimentation after experiment, like again and again, and then trying to bring this to other places around the globe within PayPal, and like that was it. But like, it was just a very transparent, very open journey I had. Like, it never would have succeeded without, like, one thing, the PayPal is an innovative culture. Like that is one thing that is true. If you go back to the early days of PayPal, there's a lot of things within that. So like at its core, like we did have that kernel. And I think it may have been much tougher in a different type of environment to do what I had done. If it didn't have that core of innovation. But all that said, the one thing that we did have, and we said this all the time, and I said this every time I gave a talk, was like our tenet was everyone can innovate. And that was the belief. Like we as human beings are all innovators and we all have this capability to do that. This is how we got to where we are at today as a species. The important thing with that, though, is like you need to have the incentives and the surroundings to allow that to happen. And that's a lot of what I worked on.
Yeah, I mean that belief of everyone has an innovative core, I think
Yeah.
resonates very very strongly with me. I also obviously firsthand see all the time this very kind of scrappy and startup-y approach to getting innovation started. It was a side of the job thing that I love to do, and I did it. And then I borrowed a room and stuck some stuff in there. And I think those stories are great. They also somewhat fill me with like, oh, but more. Like, why does it have to be so hard? If you look on the other side of the incredible outcomes from doing this well, and that you really feel like it should be the heart and soul of what it is to run a business, right? Like the cultural
Yeah.
piece of it, the change management piece of it, the perpetual need to drive growth and revenue and cost efficiency into the organization is all a part of the tilt of what an innovation mindset brings, right? And so obviously living inside this space and pushing total innovation as this connected system, a big part of my thinking is like, great, Mike, but how do we make it so the next version of you doesn't really need to have to do that, right? And if they do, that it's still, it's not pushing as much water uphill, and perhaps it's not as interesting, and maybe that's half the bloody problem here. But the business is missing out by having to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's harder to do in a company of 20,000 or something. It's easier to do in a smaller company, I think. But even within a company that maybe doesn't have that, the one thing you as a manager or a leader potentially have power to do that is within your teams. And I'll give one example, and I love talking about this story because it will really show the innovation that in each and every person in my team before I was in that job. I was, as I mentioned before, I was in a function called product launch, which is a weird hybrid between product management and program management. And it's sort of like half and half if people are familiar with that in the software world. And I believe that the team had to be like innovative and creative to be successful. And so when I took on the team, I think I had 10 people reporting to me. Half said that, and I literally asked them like straight up, like up front, like, do you consider yourself to be creative or innovative? And I use those words usually interchangeably. About half said yes, half said no. My goal was, at the end of this job, above everything else in my mind, was like, I wanted everyone to see themselves as being creative and innovative. So one of the things I did, and Simon, this is a really easy thing to do. Like I just basically took every one of our weekly meetings and I said, okay, first 5 minutes of the meeting, it's not even first 5 minutes, first 2 minutes of the weekly meeting. I'm going to cold call on somebody and you're going to tell me something innovative you've done in the past week.
Yeah.
And it could be personal, it could be professional, it didn't matter. And this was a way to, at first people were like, oh my God, my boss is doing this. What the heck? I have all this other stuff to do. Now I have to think about this. But people, and I think I volunteered myself the first week. And then the second week I called on somebody and called on someone else. And they would share things and they would share these really cool things like how, somebody wasn't showing up to a meeting and they really needed this person in the meeting. They could have gone to the boss and complained or whatever else, and they did some research and they found out that this person liked a certain type of donuts that they have here that's very popular here in San Jose. And they're like, okay, we're going to start bringing those donuts to these meetings. And they put that right at the top of the invite. And you know what? Lo and behold, that person starts showing up to that meeting. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, that's brilliant. Like spending $15 on some donuts to get a person to do like versus to go like that is
Exactly.
innovative. That is
Yeah.
creative. And I really want to emphasize like we're not trying to create a rocket ship here. Like it's the little things that we have the power to change and to manipulate. So like for anybody who's listening out there, take that idea, like do that with your own teams. See what it is. It does take a little persistence from your side, but I think there are ways to do this. And if you suddenly become the innovative team within your company, I think others are going to start to recognize you, and that could really start to shift the culture overall.
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice, and I really like these little micro things that make a big difference. Because yeah, people feel like they can't innovate because, as you said up front, I'm not the engineer, I'm not the creative type, I'm not. But as you noted, rather than going with the obvious route of I need $25,000 for this keynote speaker, is no, you don't. You can invite them along and buy some of their books, which you would have bought anyway, and they turn up, and so lots of this creative problem solving rather than maybe the word innovation is quite a nice
This is
mindset for folk as well.
Simon, just to build off that real quickly, just my kids will often come to me and say like, "Well, I can either do this or this. It's A or B." And I always say to them like, "Well, what's C? What's D? What are the other options?" Like I think we have some binary aspect of our brains where it has to be one or the other when it never does have to be one or the other. There are many more options always in front of us, and it just takes a little bit of time of just stepping back to think about like what are the other creative options and solutions you could have? And that meeting for that was like, okay, I'm either going to go complain to the boss or complain to the guy about not showing up. Well, no, he actually went to the completely different route and that was more effective. And those are the innovative solutions that really start to stack up and make, just business and people in those organizations way more impactful.
Exactly. You should have brought the donuts. Could be a good title for a podcast as well,
Yeah,
actually.
that's right. That's
Hey,
right. It'll be your title.
let's skip into Mike, the founder, then, and talk to me a little bit about that journey and
Yeah.
how that adds to the experience, but also to the lessons learned.
So going back, I think I was always entrepreneurial when I was young. A big thing when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s was collecting baseball cards. So was a more popular sport back then, but they would have, little cardboard cards and, collect and trade them and all that. And it became a business. I didn't know, but there was like literally a speculative boom that I was like living in the middle of when I was growing up, and I would collect and trade those. I also got into comic books, doing the same kind of thing when I was growing up as well. And there was one comic book with a character called Guy Gardner, who I think is actually going to be in the new Superman movie. In fact, Nathan Fillion is going to be playing him. And I remember I was at a convention once. The guy who was the artist on the first issue of Guy Gardner was there, and he had the original cover art. So the hand-drawn artwork that only one exists that was reproduced millions and millions of times, so like all that. And that's how comic book art works and worked back then before it was digital. Like you would draw it and then you would reproduce it so it would become in a comic book. And I remember it was like, I don't know, it was expensive, more than whatever my teenage budget could handle. And then I remember growing up years later and thinking about it, like, I should go buy that thing. Let me go on eBay. I want to buy that. I got some money now. It'd be cool to have. Like, I got a couple $100 to spend. And you know what? Like, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything even close to it. And the problem that I was solving was when there's only one of something in the world, it's really hard to find that one. Like, yes, if you want to find the Mona Lisa, you know where to find that. But for most things where there's only one of them, it's super hard to come by. Because, like, what are the odds it happens to be at eBay at that very time or whatever? Like, no. So what I built was a marketplace to better serve collectors. Originally, I was starting with comic art, but I wanted to expand into shoes and all this other kind of stuff. And this was in 2009. And that was it. It was called Sketch Maven. And I had all these other Maven, Shoe Maven, and all this other stuff eventually that would have expanded into. And I'm like, okay, can I serve collectibles markets better with this structured marketplace? I didn't know anything about building a website. This was before Stripe and Braintree. So like I was using Odesk at the time and having people build the site for me. And like I remember we launched, we didn't even have a secure checkout because I didn't ask for that. So people are putting a credit card number. It's not even secure out there. Like, of course, like that doesn't happen today because of Stripe and all that. But like 2009, I didn't even know to ask for that. So I built this site, just a total passion of mine. This was after my MBA. While everyone else is getting jobs and consulting, whatever else, I'm like, I'm going to start my own crazy company. I'm doing that, moderate success, sites getting hacked all the time. All this stuff I'm having to deal with, I'm having to market it, and it's a marketplace. So I'm trying to track, both sellers and buyers. 2000. Luckily, Facebook ads in 2009 were ridiculously cheap. It was like, CPM, cost per thousand for some of the ads was like 10 cents.
Yeah.
For very targeted ads, in fact. So like targeting Star Wars fans with a Star Wars ad and all that. But like, that doesn't exist anymore. But like I was doing that, having, moderate success, but like just honestly struggling and more money going out than coming in over 2 years. I didn't get to expand into other things. And finally, when first kid comes around, I'm like, okay, I probably need to get a real job. And that's what brought me into PayPal. And I will say, like, my PayPal interview was like 8 hours of me talking about all the ways I screwed up with Sketch Maven. It was all the failures I had. It was all that was basically what I talked about for 8 hours. It was like, yeah, I could tell you how I screwed this thing up right real bad here. Because I actually didn't have tech experience before that. I was actually at a paper company of all things before that. But somehow they hired me. I got the job there and kind of took me off on the trajectory I'm at today.
Before I skip us into looking at some of the future as well, what is your reflections on what that gave you, right? Some people might be listening thinking, hi, I want to step into entrepreneurship, or should I quit my job and go and do this, or should I get a job after my MBA? And it sounds like it was kind of formative for you. Maybe the question is, would you do it again?
Yeah.
But what advice would you give to the people on that?
Yeah, I mean, here's like, I think a lot of people were telling me, yeah, you got to quit your job and do this. Like, I actually don't know if I need to quit my job, especially in today where you have like things like AI tools and agents, and frankly, you have so many services out there that could do so many of the things. If it is a website or whatever, look, if you're going to open a cupcake shop or something, yeah, you probably do need to quit your job if you're going to be running that. But I would also say, like, before you open a cupcake shop, start putting them on Uber Eats at night and selling them out of your house or whatever. I mean, there are ways to experiment before you have to really make the jump in something, whether it's digital or physical. So I would say do whatever you can to experiment beforehand. You don't necessarily need to quit your job up front. But I was young. It was before kids when I had it. And look, all of the failures that I had, and the couple successes I had in those few years, I learned more from that than I did at any other 2 year period in my career. So, like from that perspective, no, don't regret it one bit.
Yeah, I'm always super inspired and slightly I cross my fingers for them. I have some good friends who are doing entrepreneurship with very young families as well, right?
Yeah.
I started before the kids, and obviously I have them now, but we were more established by then. But those early days, and that risk appetite is quite different. Maybe there's some parallels there between the risk appetite of corporates and innovation, and young parents and innovation as well, because the
I
risk.
think so. I think there's probably something there. And look, I'm also not saying it is like impossible to do once you have kids. It's just a little bit harder to do that. That's all.
It's just a bit
It's a
riskier.
little bit harder.
So you sort of touched on this a little bit, and I think there's a lot of noise now around the AI impact, particularly on transformation and innovation writ large, right? You're now doing more educational work and hands-on research, I guess, and testing of some of these tools. And you've spoken quite a bit on this recently. We don't have a bag of time, so maybe I can try and distill some of that thoughts from you for this last chapter of the podcast today, in terms of your how you see this playing out, and what the opportunity is from a corporate innovation perspective.
Yeah. Look, I think AI is going to completely change how all of us work and how all of us operate. It's going to be much more impactful than what the internet actually was. And if you really stop to think about what your job was like 25 years ago, and I know some people might be not old enough, but whatever your job title, like what is that today and what was that 25 years ago? I think for a lot of people, like, well, it didn't exist like that. That wasn't actually a real job. Or if it was like, let's take the cupcake shop or like, a bakery or something. Like, how is that? Well, you weren't worried about Yelp and all of these other things, way back in the day. Like, there's a whole nother side to this, or posting things on Instagram or whatever else. Like, so even in what seems to be the same business, it's evolved and it's just going to change more. Um, what AI is capable of today is astounding. And what it's going to be capable of in 5 years is completely going to be unimaginable. Um, what we, I think people haven't fully embraced like what it really can do and how it does change things. Like, so I write a lot. And when I write, it is such a darn good editor to help me out with the process throughout. I will ask it for feedback. I'll ask it for suggestions. Now, there are times where I use a human editor as well. So I'm writing some children's books. I have a human editor, and that is hugely impactful. But I actually will use AI before I get to that human editor to give me some initial feedback to make their life easier to, I don't want them spending their time on punctuations and commas and all that. I'd rather have Grammarly doing that for me or throwing it into Claude or whatever it might be. Um, so even those workflows are going to totally change. And I think if you're someone who's saying, boy, I just don't see the value of AI in my job today, the only challenge I would give to those people is like, are you really looking hard enough? Are you trying to uncover what that is? And what I would say is just make that your default. Like, if you're in the car, you're commuting to work or whatever, you should, like, I do this with the kids all the time. Like, we will have on ChatGPT's voice mode, advanced voice mode, and we'll be asking it questions. We'll be having a discussion with it. It'll be quizzing the kids on homework tests that they're going to have later that day or whatever it might be, and saying if they're right or wrong answers and all this other kind of stuff. Like, that's just one little example. Like a lot of what I write now, I will actually write, I will go for a long walk dictating and having conversation. And it basically is just keeping a transcript. And I say, hey, can you summarize everything I have in there, make this into an outline, which then I will sit down on the computer and write from. And it will do that. And like this is, and again, that's just kind of a writer slash parent example, but any aspect of your life, whether it's planning things out or preparing meals or trying to do things more efficiently with your fitness goals or whatever it might be, like these tools are so helpful.
What are you telling leaders around it at the moment? Because I'm seeing this kind of corporate tilt on it, which is pretty common. Of there's a hype and a fear at the same time that
Yeah.
are that is. I described this to some of the team the other day as we were talking about the work that we're doing, and it's fairly progressive in a lot of areas, and that sort of ticks all the right boxes from a procurement. Can you show me what you can do? And then immediately all of the infosec and risk people come in and say, but can you also turn it off? Right.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a big element of that happening right now. But what are you telling leaders? Because I think I can see the utility, and you mentioned earlier, involved in blockchain projects back in the day, and I don't think it's as analogous, although I think one day that may well have its moment in the sun as well. But the innovation drive here is probably bigger and more impactful than that. But still, there's an element of, okay, it helps to put more content out in the world. Do we need more content? Maybe yes, maybe no. It helps to to revise your homework better, or maybe to cheat on your homework. It helps you with XYZ. But from a pure business perspective, outside of maybe some of the process and operations, and can I save on my on my OpEx bill from a salary perspective, how should leaders really be thinking about this in terms of really future focused innovation and growth, do you think, and
Yeah.
what role does it play?
So what I would say to leaders, hey leaders, all you leaders out there listening to me now, this is what I'm going to tell you. Few things. First of all, I hear the argument, well, it's just going to change in 6 months. So why bother doing it today? Well, like this is an evolution. Like all things improve, all things get better. The sooner you get on board and start to learn and start to get your organizations to be kind of AI first, if you will, the sooner you're going to start to understand its capabilities and the benefits. So like it's really a three-part process that I would put out for them. The first of which is to effectively take care of those infosec security, whatever, and get a corporate account. And it could be Anthropic's Claude, it could be, ChatGPT from OpenAI, it doesn't matter, or Microsoft, whatever. But like just say, hey, InfoSec, IT, we need some solution. Like, are we already storing stuff on the cloud? Yes. Well, okay, that means we're in some way sharing stuff with Amazon or whatever it might be, or these other services. We can make a case for having this. Like, there are probably companies that have much more sensitive data than you that are using these tools, but use it in the right way. And it's good to talk about those concerns that you have. So take care of that, so at least your employees aren't doing it behind your back. Because if you just say, no, you're not allowed to use this, do you know what's going to happen? Your employees are going to use it anyway. Like they just are. And better to have it in a controlled way. So that's number one. Take care of that. Number two, I would not say, hey, you need to use it for X, Y, and Z. This has to come from the bottom up. This has to come from employees doing this. And use my example that I gave earlier on, where we were talking about how I was encouraging innovation. Like, if you are running a team, say, hey, team, we're going to, at the beginning of every meeting, I'm going to call on 2 people, and they're going to talk about how they use generative AI in the past week, either personally or professionally. And we're going to share that. And you know what? We're also going to set up a Teams or a Slack channel for everyone to share questions about this. We're just going to call it AI or AI for dummies or whatever it might be. And it's going to be a way to share all this across. And you keep doing this again and again and again, and you're going to start to see patterns. And somebody's going to do one thing, and that's going to inspire someone else on the team to do that. And like, oh my gosh, well, that is going to lead to this. And you are going to start to build a AI first organization that's going to have all these things at the center. I mean, here's the one thing I will tell you, like, this is how we're all going to work in the future. This just is. Like, the choice for you is to say, well, are you going to wait to embrace that? Or are you just going to say, okay, we're going to embrace it now. It's going to be a little bit messy at times. It might not always be perfect, but we're actually going to try and get ahead of the curve now. And I think the advantages are much more to just say, okay, let's get ahead of things now versus, it's 2009 and we're like, yeah, maybe we should put up a website or whatever. Like, kind of missed the boat by that time. But better late than never.
Getting hands-on. Yeah, getting hands-on is the best advice, right? For
Absolutely.
Anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no look, I teach AI stuff at a university and all that. I could say, yeah, you should take this and blah, blah, blah. Just play with the tools. Just play with the tools. See what they're capable of. If you don't even know where to start, ask them. Say, hey, this is who I am. ChatGPT, like, what can I do with you? And just start from there.
Yeah, and I think, the risk management side of this, actually, as you were talking, I was thinking there's quite a strong analogy which hadn't occurred to me previously between the patent analogy you raised earlier of, to a degree, it's like there's a bit of patent armistice happening. There almost is the AI risk side is a little bit similar, but quite different in that there's so much nervousness because data isn't clean, and that there's a worry that I might accidentally put the wrong data out into the world or bleed sensitive data into the wrong places, that actually most of that data is useless, right? And that actually starting from a baseline of we don't need much of this. I did an open innovation project a few years ago now for a large pharmaceutical business who had hired every single specialist on planet Earth to try and figure out why one of their drugs was having the impact it was having in the market that it didn't have in testing, right? Mm-hmm. And all these amazing specialists, and they came to me and said, look, we can't figure this out. Maybe you guys can help us. The problem we've got is we also can't share much of the data with you because it's sensitive and it's not publicly available. So what can you do? I said, well, we can try, right? It's what we can do. And so we span out this, this very, very fragmented data set that was all that was available to a general group of people who in 30 days figured out what the experts with all the data couldn't figure out. And I think part of the benefit was all that data was out of the way, right? You could rely on little bits of fact, and you could use the empirical data that was present right there and then. And that was it. All the noise was removed, and that got you to a solution much faster. And I think we are inundated with so much information that actually a step away from it in terms of subject matter expertise and a different lens and a removal of all of it actually helped, right? And that isn't one simple example. It happens all of the time, that abstraction and that removal of complexity actually gets you to the conclusion faster.
I think that's right. And look, I would say just overall, with these tools, like removal of like complexity and so forth, like again, just start at like very basic level with these tools. Like the problem with AI tools in so many ways is that they have infinite possibilities and you are stuck with the paradox of choice. Like you literally don't know what to do. Cold start problem. It's just like, oh God, what do I actually do with this thing? When ChatGPT was released, it was no different than the OpenAI playground that was available using GPT-3 DaVinci. It was the exact same thing, except it just had a little bit more of a friendly text box.
Yeah.
And that's why people like me who were using this before with the playground saw ChatGPT come out, and I'm like, I was like, what's the big deal? Like, and then all of a sudden, within a week, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I found it was just a little design tweak and so forth for that, and that's why it really caught on and so forth. And it was just, and that's why I think OpenAI was even shocked at the success of ChatGPT because they're like, well, it's not really different than what we had before, but we just changed this. And sometimes that little thing is just all the difference in that. But like, one thing that AI has not been good at is design. And so I think there is still a lot that can be improved upon of just figuring out like how to get people started in these tools. That we're going to see a lot of improvement in the coming, like, they haven't, as a product guy, who spent many years in product, I will say like they weren't taking, these are research institutions. We're focused on research, not as much on UI and design and product and all these things. They're starting to get there now. But like, they've got a lot further to go still.
But I think there's a lot of analogy between that and the adoption of things like the PC and the work that Microsoft did to bring that out, right? Like it was actually less capable than the original things that sat behind it from an MS DOS perspective and previously, but it had a nicer face on it that meant that more people could use it. And
That's right. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't have to be more powerful. It just has to be more usable, and that's ultimately what matters.
Can I just, so I'm going to start to wind us in because I know I'm a little bit over time and I'm enjoying this conversation. I think we could probably talk all day. I'm gonna take you back a little bit actually, and final question, and then I'll wrap us up. Is you worked at in your product days at PayPal at Beacon? You mentioned it earlier, and you also said people can look it up, but it never made mass market. It was a good product. So,
I loved it.
What was it about Beacon that was you can look back and learn and think about that meant that it didn't have that breakout moment and why and what, right? From a sort of not as successful as you'd liked it to be innovation story, or maybe it was, but it got buried somewhere in a different feature.
I mean, look, I think it just wasn't the right time. So let me put in perspective for folks. So in 2012, 2013, when we were working on this, they were launching something called Bluetooth 4.0. So it was a new Bluetooth protocol that you no longer had to like actively sync devices. It was allowing a passive communication between two devices. And that was kind of the key to this. And there was a really brilliant engineer on a PayPal team who uncovered this. He's like, wow, if you can do this, you can actually do this. So this was a side project that he was working on at the time. And we were starting to build this out. And I actually remember, so Apple's headquarters in Cupertino were not far away from PayPal. He was actually driving to Cupertino to help the Apple team because they didn't understand well enough how Bluetooth 4.0 would integrate into their latest iPhone. So it was kind of amazing. Like he was very much at the forefront. He was in depth in this and so forth. And look, he was solving a great technological problem, probably helped out Apple with the iPhone, but it's also like, hey, this little piece of hardware can now talk to iPhones or Android devices. This is going to be great for payments. Look, the technology worked. It was cool. I mean, it could have even done things like in a Starbucks. And frankly, we talked to coffee chains about this. I will just say, like, you could point it out the window. So when your car would come into the parking lot, it would actually know that you were there and it could actually start making your coffee if you come between these certain hours or something. Like there's all these parameters we could have done with it. But here's the thing. None of that mattered because it really wasn't solving a pain point for customers at the time. If you looked at, so we had 3 stores on University Avenue in Palo Alto that had beacons set up. They all had relationships with PayPal. I literally helped set it up. And if you watch some of like the Bloomberg video that covered this, you could actually see one of his in Chantal Guillon is this French macaron place that they had there. And this was right next to Stanford University. So one of the, the premier tech colleges in the world with all these tech savvy students. So when we built this probably for 6, 9 months. When we actually started to put it out there to the world, I was talking to these students and saying like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, we'll give you something, just give us some feedback. And they were basically like, well, why the hell would I not just use my credit card? Like, why won't I just use cash? Like, what's the point of this? Like, I don't need to use my phone to buy stuff.
Hmm.
And look, we heard that a couple times. We're like, oh, well, what do they know? And then you hear a few more customers again and again and again. And you're like, oh crap, we're not solving any problem that people have here. People just weren't ready for it. And the technology we had wasn't big enough of a leap for them to see like, oh my God, it is so tedious using a credit card. Like, no, especially in the United States, people have been habituated for the last 50 years before that to just slide a credit card.
Yeah.
And frankly, in the US, it took COVID to get us to the point where you don't actually want to touch your thing on a dirty terminal. You just want to tap this within the vicinity. And that was the one behavioral change that finally got people to adopt NFC in the United States. And even then, like credit cards are still far and away the number one use payments in stores, well beyond NFC payments. So look, the one lesson from this is, yeah, technology is cool. It's fun. But if it's not actually solving people's problems, like you're not doing anything with it. And timing has a lot to do with it. Like if we launch that today, yeah, I think it could be interesting. We might have missed our window with NFC and so forth to be able to do that. But in the end, you got to talk to customers. And a lot of this was on me. I didn't talk to customers early enough with this because frankly, I was so excited about the technology as well. I'm like, oh yeah, let's get this in stores. Then we'll talk to people and we'll see how much they love it. No, we
Yeah,
talked
because
to
it's a
people and saw
no-brainer,
how
right?
much they
It's super
were
cool.
apathetic about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you, Mike, and I'm glad I went there. Actually, we hadn't teed up any of this conversation really, and it's been very organic and natural. So thank
Yeah.
you. From hoodies to cupcakes to donuts to French macaron to Superman to blockchain, we've covered a lot in this conversation, and it's been super interesting and a very honest and authentic account as well. So thank you very much. And I'm sure that from a listener's perspective, they'll gauge a lot from this. I'd actually encourage everybody to go find Mike on LinkedIn and follow his content. He puts out a lot of interesting stuff. That's how we discovered each other as well. And so thank you and keep that up. Keep those long walks up and those dictations and those AI summations and everything else. And I know it's all your own thinking and work, right? As much as you might lean on those tools, as we
Yeah.
said up front with our quirky little rhyme, like you wrote that, right? And I
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, AI is not to the point where it's going to be creating great original content. I mean, last thing I will say is, so I actually write AI books, write in quotes, because I basically say, "Hey, AI, write a book," and I hit a button, and I publish those under the name Alex Irons. So anybody can go on Amazon, type in Alex Irons, and you will see a whole bunch of books, like 15, written by AI. I donate all the money to charity, by the way, so I don't keep any of that money because I don't feel right doing it. But you will see those books suck. And this is a little bit of an experiment with me that I've been doing since 2022 of just saying like, hey, how good is AI of just saying like, hey, AI, just go make something funny, make something interesting. You can't really do it. It's very mediocre in everything that it does. And so there is a very much for now and for the foreseeable future, a place for people who are creative, who have interesting thoughts. Like you are the person building this, and the AI is just a tool to help you out in your vision.
Wonderful. Well, listen, thank you very much, Mike. And we won't get Alex Irons on the next podcast then.
So you'll see the picture of Alex Irons. He has a much bigger beard than I do, so I'd have to grow it out, I think.
But thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for listening. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us feedback. Please share it with others. Please hit subscribe because we'll keep these exciting, informative, and interesting episodes coming. And Mike, thank you very much again.
Simon, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.